Hello chess friends and welcome to your of chess channel and welcome back to the Tata Steel Masters in 2022. So we're now already in the round 6 of the super event and we're following now a beautiful game that was played between Magnus Carlsen and Richard Rapport. So Magnus Carlsen, of course, he didn't play so far his best tournament. He had only 1 win and 4 draws out of the 5 games. So let's check out now what happened, because it was simply time for Magnus to make something happen if he wants, of course, to be the winner of the Tata Steel Masters in 2022. So let's check out now what happened. Magnus Carlsen opened with the move knight to f3. Richard Rapport's response was d5. We have a d4. After move knight to f3, c4, the queen's gambit is on the board, and after move e6, we have the queen's gambit declined. And okay, you could go into the 3 knights variation. This would be, I think, the most often and most popular line. But again, Magnus Carlsen played the Catalan opening, and recently Magnus Carlsen plays very often the Catalan opening, which is of course much sharper, because in one particular moment black is going to take the pawn on c4, and then of course the game becomes really dynamic. This pawn structure is asymmetrical, so the game is more tactical than this usual move knight to c3 then of course you can play. So here Richard Rapport accepts the challenge immediately. D takes c4. We have bishop to g2. The problem always for white in the Catalan is, okay, you have your pawn central control, which means when black takes, of course, then you have 2 versus 1. You have 2 pawns in the center versus 1 pawn in the center of blacks, but you have to again lose 2 tempi, at least 2 tempi, in order to grab back the pawn. So for instance, you can play ideas like knight to a3 and then knight to c4. You can play queen to a4, queen to c4. You can play queen to c2, queen to c4. But every time you need just 2 additional moves in order to get back your pawn. And meanwhile, of course, black is doing something. Black is simply playing on a fast development. So we have here knight to c6. This move is not allowing Magnus Carlsen to go into some ideas with queen to c2, because then of course the d4 pawn would be hanging. So we have castling, rook to b8. Now Richard Rapport is trying to support his pawn with the move b5, and here Magnus Carlsen found a different idea how to protect the pawn on d4, because now he wants to play much more freely with the queen. He wants now finally to liberate his queen and take out the pawn. So here Richard Rapport played bishop to d6. Probably a slightly more accurate idea is to play bishop to e7, because with the move bishop to d6 you're getting in front of your own queen, and the queen is not attacking anymore the d4 square, which is, I think, a huge difference. But okay, here Richard Rapport played now the move bishop to d6 and allowed now Magnus Carlsen to go with the move queen to c1, attacking here the pawn c4. And Richard Rapport protects the pawn, which seems so. It seems so in the beginning that Richard Rapport finally defended himself here, but actually the cool part about this move queen to c1 is of course also this indirect attack against this knight on c6. So that's why here with the move b3 Magnus Carlsen had a beautiful chance now to open the c file. So we have bishop to b7. Of course c takes the b3 is not working because you lose the knight. So bishop to b7, b takes c4, b takes c4, and you see now queen to c4. And okay, in my opinion, this is a solid position again for black, because first of all, what we can notice also in a potential middle game stage, what black needs to do now here is simply to push the pawn on c4. This is now the main goal, because this pawn on c7 is of course a little bit weak. It's idle, so that's why with the move c5 I think black can liberate himself in an easy way. So here knight to b4 played by Richard Rapport, also not allowing here Magnus Carlsen to create some discovered attacks. Play something like knight to g5. If that happens, of course, then I think black would be very satisfied to give up here this light for bishop 4, this light for bishop on g2, which actually in the Catalan opening is of course the best minor piece of white. So we have now a3, kicking away the knight, knight to d5. Beautiful maneuver here by Rapport of the knight, centralizing the position around the square. We have bishop to g5 by Magnus, castling, and now knight to d2. And okay, both players have really finished their development. What the most important thing I think for Magnus Carlsen is maybe here the move e4, but e4 is not working immediately. I think because of some tactical possibilities around that square. Maybe h6 first of all can be also an idea here by Richard Rapport to kick away then this bishop from this very annoying pin, and that's exactly what Richard Rapport did. h6, simply not allowing, not tolerating this pin, bishop to f6, and now knight to f6. And you see now, even if you play e4 immediately, here you lose the pawn. That's why I think Magnus would love, of course, to play this kind of a setup where you have two pawns connected, but you have to prepare this move with some ideas for rook to e2, maybe even queen to c2. But even if you do that, of course, even if you manage to push the pawn on e4, then still black, as we said, has the opportunity to break white's pawn chain in the center with the move c5. So here, that's why after move knight to f6, Magnus Carlsen played simply on this weakness on c7. Richard Rapport played knight to d7, preparing now the move c5. We have queen to a4, and now c5 immediately, which is, I think, good choice here for Richard Rapport. Really great simplification idea. Although you can maybe ask yourself the question, why is black not playing maybe some ideas of a6, protecting the pawn on a7? Well, the problem actually is that you could get challenged with some ideas like rook to b1, and there are now I think even some tactics like rook takes b7, and then something like, I don't know, knight to e5, liberating then here this long diagonal, and then play something like knight to c6. That could be also actually, I think, a beautiful tactical shot that white could pull off. So that's why c5, normal idea. Magnus Carlsen accepts the challenge, plays now queen takes a7, and now bishop to f3, which was now the first really mistake by Richard Rapport. He should not have played that move. I think he should not give up his light square bishop, because what we can notice now in this position, and after here Magnus Carlsen bishop to f3, we have now a new position in which Magnus Carlsen has now a distant pass pawn, which is supported first of all by the rook. And the cool part about the pawn is that the bishop is controlling this very important square a8. So the only thing now that Magnus Carlsen needs to do is push the pawn. Instead of this move bishop to f3, a slightly better idea is to play bishop to d5. The problem again for Magnus Carlsen is that you cannot play e4. Even if you play e4, you see with rook to a8, even the queen gets trapped. So the problem is, again, you cannot play this move e4. White would always love to do that. White would always love to have this brutal central control with the pawns in the center, but so far this idea is not working. So that's why after queen to a7, bishop to f3, as I said, was played by Rapport. Really unnecessary move. After bishop to f3, we have now c takes d4, and still nothing went wrong again for Rapport, because here Magnus Carlsen cannot take immediately the pawn on d4, because you get bishop to e5, and you see the rook would be hanging. So far it's not a possibility. So that's why here Magnus Carlsen gets out of the potential range, and now comes the critical moment, I think, of the game. Here Richard Rapport played queen to e7, and in my opinion, this is really unnecessary. What you can do is play here e5, first of all, protect the pawn. Okay, again, maybe white has this very annoying pawn on the a file, which you have to protect. But finally, I think black is now suddenly a dominant position when it comes to pawns in the center of the board. Or instead of this move e5, you can play also knight to e5 is perfectly fine, because the problem is now, even if you play bishop to e4, if you want to get out of the range, then with d3 we can solve, I think, all of the positional problems. Again, being said, queen to d4 is not working here again, because bishop to a3 would be a tactic that liberates really black here. So it's not the point that white can take out the pawn on d4. White doesn't want to lose this pawn. If that happens, then it's at least a drawish position, I think, for black. Let's see the scenario. You can maybe here take out the queen, takes, you take the bishop, and here of course also black takes out the knight on d2. So again, I think it's a clear draw here for both sides. So, but as we said, queen to e7 was a huge mistake by Rapport. e5 or bishop to e5, both moves are simply working for black, and Magnus Carlsen simply pushed the pawn further. Now this tactic is not working. His pawn is protected. We have now rook from f to d8. Here maybe again it was time to protect. I'm not sure what happened now to Richard Rapport. His position really fell apart. He played now 2-3 mistakes in a row, which is really wild. Rook to b4 again at least protects the pawn for a while, but he played the rook from f to d8, and Magnus Carlsen simply grabs the pawn, because there is not a tactic anymore with this move bishop to e5. I'm not sure what happened. As I said, really wild stuff. Richard Rapport played 2-3 moves really in a bad way. Magnus Carlsen accepted the challenge and simply grabbed the pawn. Has now a beautiful endgame here with this distant pass pawn. So finally rook to b4 here by Rapport, but it's a little bit too late. Queen to c3, knight to b6, and after move a5 here queen to a7. Again a huge blunder by Richard Rapport. He's getting, of course, the queen, it seems, so that you cannot take, because a takes b6 would come with rook to a2, but it's not a problem because Magnus Carlsen pinned here further Richard Rapport. We have bishop to e7, we have a rook to c2. Now Magnus Carlsen connects his rook, so now there is the serious threat a takes b6. That's why here Richard Rapport tried to counterattack bishop to g5. We have queen to c5 here by Magnus Carlsen. He's staying on this very annoying pin, and now after move bishop to e7, Magnus Carlsen accepts the challenge, says okay, I'm going to take the queen too. If you want to take my queen, I'm going to take the queen, and of course this is then completely winning here for White with this distant pass pawn and also with this extra piece. So but after move a takes b6 here, Richard Rapport took queen takes a2. We have queen to e7, and now this is a fourth scenario, queen takes c2, and Magnus Carlsen also takes. We have king to h7, and after b7 in this position Richard Rapport resigns. So what's the point about this resignment? Because even if you play queen to b2, then queen to d7 is going to happen, and there's not a good way for black to defend this position. Even if you try something like f6, then bishop to e4 is, for instance, working. So this is simply a position to resign here for black. So okay, really wild game. I'm not sure what happened. Richard Rapport played really too many mistakes against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen accepted all of them, and here he played not maybe his best of the game, but very important to win for the world champion, and he has now 2 wins and 4 draws out of his first 6 games. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage so far. Here are some links of some games that we have analyzed before, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.